The hardest part of climbing Everest in 1953 wasn't just the mountain, it was everything nobody knew about it. Today, fixed ropes run almost continuously to the summit, on a route prepared long before climbers arrive. Helicopters deliver fresh supplies to base camp. Accurate weather forecasts pinpoint the safest summit window. In 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay had none of that. They climbed into almost complete uncertainty. They wore wool. They carried oxygen equipment that had never been tested at that altitude. They had no reliable forecast, no map of the final route. No one had ever been there before. More than 70 years separate those two expeditions. Everest has barely changed, but everything around it has. For the 1953 expedition, reaching Everest was an expedition of its own. There was no airport anywhere near Everest, no road to base camp. After flying to India and traveling overland to Kathmandu, the team had to set out on foot for a journey of roughly 240 kilometers that took 5 weeks. The trail climbed from tropical jungle over high mountain passes and into the thin air of the Himalayas. Every crate of food, every oxygen cylinder, every tent pole and scientific instrument had to survive that journey before the climb could even begin. They were accompanied by 350 porters, 20 Sherpa guides, and long columns of yaks, carrying tons of food, fuel, tents, and oxygen equipment across terrain that changed from forest to permanent snow. Entire villages watched the caravan pass as it wound through narrow mountain trails, stretching for hundreds of meters across the landscape. Today, many commercial climbers spend a night in Kathmandu before boarding a helicopter. Around 45 minutes later, they step out at base camp alongside fresh food and other supplies flown directly onto the glacier. Some operators offer VIP packages in which champagne is among the supplies delivered. A journey that once consumed 5 weeks now takes less than an hour, and base camp was only where the real expedition began. Reaching base camp was only the first obstacle. Living on the mountain was another. In 1953, Norgay and Hillary climbed in wool and cotton, materials that trap moisture instead of shedding it. Their leather boots weighed nearly 2 kilograms each. The tents were heavy canvas and highly vulnerable to the violent high-altitude storms. Even sleeping bags lost much of their insulation when damp. Once clothing became wet, drying it in the freezing air was often impossible, leaving climbers to begin the next day wearing the same cold, damp layers. Simple tasks became difficult. At 8,000 meters, water boils at just 70 degrees Celsius. On kerosene stoves that struggled in the cold, preparing a hot meal could take nearly an hour, and the food was often barely warm. Even melting snow for drinking water demanded time, fuel, and constant attention, making simply drinking water a daily challenge rather than a routine task. Today, lightweight synthetic fabrics stay warm when wet. Modern triple-layer boots provide vastly better insulation. Modern stoves boil water in minutes, and freeze-dried meals require little more than hot water. Equipment that once demanded constant maintenance has become lighter, faster, and far more reliable. The difference is more than comfort. It transformed how climbers could survive on the mountain. But one problem could not be solved with warmer clothing or better tents: the air itself. Above 8,000 meters, the human body can no longer absorb enough oxygen to function normally. Judgment deteriorates. Coordination fails. Without supplemental oxygen, survival becomes a matter of hours. This region is known as the death zone. At this altitude, the air contains the same percentage of oxygen as at sea level, but the atmospheric pressure is so low that each breath delivers only about a third as much usable oxygen. In 1953, Hillary and Norgay relied on oxygen equipment that had never been tested at that altitude. The 4-cylinder system weighed 13.6 kilograms. The rigid steel frame added even more weight to an already exhausting climb, and every extra kilogram had to be carried through air that offered almost no margin for physical effort. Its valves were unreliable. During an earlier summit attempt, one failure took more than an hour to repair in the freezing cold. With numb fingers inside bulky gloves, even simple adjustments became painstakingly slow. When they finally reached the summit, only about 20 minutes of oxygen remained. Today, carbon fiber cylinders weigh only a fraction as much. Modern regulators are thoroughly tested, can be adjusted without removing gloves, and are backed up with spare systems. Many climbers even sleep on supplemental oxygen at the highest camps. Additional cylinders are positioned at high camps before the summit push, allowing climbers to exchange empty bottles without carrying every supply from base camp. What was once experimental is now routine, but even perfect equipment could not solve Everest's next great uncertainty. The oxygen problem could, at least in principle, be engineered around. The route could not. Immediately above base camp lies the Khumbu Icefall, 3 kilometers of moving glacier that shifts by around 1 meter every day, creating crevasses that can reach 30 meters in depth and seracs, ice towers weighing hundreds of tons that can collapse without warning. The entire glacier is in constant motion, meaning a safe path one day may be blocked or destroyed the next. In 1953, no route existed. Hillary and Norgay crossed the icefall by observation alone, with no detailed map and no way of knowing which sections were stable. Each ladder crossing, snow bridge, and detour had to be chosen in real time, with no previous expedition to confirm whether a safer alternative existed. Every decision carried consequences that could not be reversed. Today, that uncertainty is largely removed. Weeks before the climbing season begins, specialist Sherpa teams known as the Icefall Doctors establish the safest available route. They install fixed ropes and aluminium ladder bridges across yawning crevasses, some requiring multiple ladders lashed together into a single crossing. The route through the Khumbu Icefall is prepared, marked, and equipped before any paying client arrives at base camp. As the glacier shifts throughout the season, the Icefall Doctors return repeatedly to repair damage and reroute sections that have become too dangerous. Above the icefall, fixed ropes extend in sections toward the summit. Modern climbers follow a route that has already been established. In 1953, Hillary and Norgay placed their own ropes, built their own anchors, and climbed into terrain that no one had ever seen before. Above the South Col, even the final line to the summit had to be discovered as they climbed, step by step, through completely unknown ground. Even after the route had been established, every decision on the mountain depended ultimately on one factor that neither experience nor equipment could fully control. In 1953, forecasting on Everest meant reading barometers, watching the sky, and interpreting pressure changes by hand. There were no satellites, no numerical forecast models, no specialist mountain meteorologists. Every decision depended on experience, instinct, and whatever clues the mountain revealed that day. When storms arrived, they often arrived without warning. One night, violent winds ripped into the team's high camp, snapping tent poles and tearing canvas, as the climbers fought for hours to save their shelter from being blown off the mountain. At nearly 8,000 meters, even leaving the tent to make repairs exposed climbers to conditions that could cause frostbite within minutes. Today, expeditions receive detailed mountain forecasts by satellite, often updated twice a day. Summit windows can be identified several days in advance, allowing teams to plan their climb around specific dates and times. Commercial clients check the forecast on their phones from inside heated sleeping bags. Specialist meteorologists analyze multiple forecast models, wind speeds at different elevations, and the expected arrival of the Himalayan jet stream before recommending the safest day to leave camp. In 1953, none of that existed. The expedition was forced to abandon its progress and wait at base camp for weeks, not because the climbers were exhausted or their equipment had failed, but because no reliable way existed to predict when the mountain would briefly become climbable. Waiting was itself a gamble. Leave too early and the team could be trapped by a storm. Leave too late and the annual monsoon would close the mountain altogether. When Hillary and Norgay finally reached the summit on 29th of May, 1953, that opportunity had been identified using little more than barometric pressure and direct observation of the sky. One of the most successful expeditions in mountaineering history ultimately depended on a brief break in the weather that no one could see coming more than a short time in advance.